Trump called Iran's government seriously fractured today. He is right. But nobody is explaining why that fracture is actually Iran's most powerful weapon right now. This morning, Iran fired on a ship. Last night, Trump extended the ceasefire. Those two things happening on the same day is not a contradiction. It is a strategy. It is a signal. And it is a window into a war that most analysts are completely misreading. Let me show you exactly what happened. Iran's Revolutionary Guard opened fire on a container ship in the Strait of Hormuz. No warning, no hailing, no radio check. A gunboat approached, and without any communication, it fired. The ship was damaged. The crew is safe, but the vessel is not. The United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations confirmed the incident. Iran has not officially acknowledged it yet. That silence is also a signal. The ceasefire that was supposed to expire last night was extended just hours before by Donald Trump himself. He announced it on Truth Social, indefinite extension. Not a day, not a week, indefinitely, until Iran's leaders and representatives can come up with a unified proposal, in his words. And within hours of that extension, Iran's own military shot at a commercial vessel in the world's most important waterway. That sequence of events tells you everything you need to know about where this war actually stands today. Not what the press releases say, not what the Truth Social posts say, what the actions say. Because in geopolitics, what countries do is always more honest than what they announce. But to understand why those two things happened on the same day, the extension and the attack, you need to see what Trump said before any of this unfolded. And you need to see what happened inside Tehran while he was saying it. I want to walk you through exactly what happened in the last 24 hours, why it matters, and why the single most revealing sentence spoken by anyone in this conflict today did not come from Trump, did not come from Iran's foreign minister, but came from a relatively unknown Iranian parliamentary advisor named Mahdi Mohammadi. Here is what Mohammadi posted on X this morning. I am going to read it exactly. Trump's ceasefire extension, quote, means nothing. The losing side cannot set conditions. The continuation of the blockade is no different from bombing and must be responded to militarily. The time for Iran's initiative has come. Read that again. The losing side cannot set conditions. That one line tells you exactly how Iran's military leadership is reading this moment. They do not see themselves as the losing side. They see the ceasefire extension as proof that America blinked, and they are preparing their next move accordingly. Now let me give you the number that proves Mohammadi is not just a random hardliner venting on social media. He is the voice of a faction that controls Iran's most valuable asset in this war. The IRGC runs the shadow tanker fleet. These are the ships that turn off their transponders, sail under false flags, and move Iranian oil past the U.S. naval blockade. And since the ceasefire began on April 8th, that fleet has moved an estimated 12 to 15 million barrels of oil past the blockade. At current prices, that is roughly $1.2 to $1.5 billion, enough to fund IRGC operations for another 2 months without a single concession to Washington. That number changes how you read everything else. The civilian faction in Tehran is bleeding economically. The IRGC is not. The blockade hurts ordinary Iranians. It does not hurt the Revolutionary Guard. They have their own supply lines, their own revenue streams, their own navy, their own fleet. Understanding what is happening right now requires understanding the fracture that is now visible inside the Iranian government itself. And I mean visible in a way that has not been true for years. Let me take you back to yesterday afternoon. Trump was on CNBC saying he expected to resume bombing Iran if no deal was reached before Wednesday's deadline. He said, and these are his exact words, "We are ready to go." J.D. Vance was packed and ready to fly to Islamabad, Pakistan for a second round of peace talks. Everything pointed toward a hard deadline, a real reckoning, a moment where this ceasefire either transformed into a deal or collapsed into renewed war. Then something shifted. Trump posted on Truth Social that the ceasefire would be extended indefinitely. The reason he gave was that the government of Iran is, in his words, seriously fractured. Vance canceled his Pakistan trip. The second round of talks, which Iran had already refused to confirm attendance at, became officially postponed with no new date. And the Strait of Hormuz, which Trump said he would force open, saw a gunboat attack on a container ship this morning. So what actually happened? Why did the man who said we are ready to go suddenly extend the ceasefire with no end date? And why did Iran, which is supposedly desperate for relief from the blockade, respond to that extension by shooting at another ship? The answer to both questions lives in a single word that Trump himself used: fractured. Here is what the reporting from multiple sources is showing us about what is happening inside Iran right now. There are two governments operating simultaneously in Tehran, and they do not agree on what to do. Not a polite disagreement. not a bureaucratic turf war. A fundamental existential split over whether to negotiate with the United States or to fight. On one side, you have Iran's civilian political leadership, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who led the first round of Islamabad talks, President Pezeshkian. These men understand the economic reality of this war. Nearly 3,400 Iranians killed since February 28th, according to Iran's own forensics chief. The blockade costing Iran hundreds of millions of dollars daily. The shadow trade corridors under increasing pressure. The civilian population bearing the weight of fuel shortages, damaged infrastructure, and a war that has now dragged past 7 weeks. These men went to Islamabad. They sat across the table from Vance and Witkoff and Kushner. They negotiated. They were not performing. They were genuinely trying to find a deal because they know, better than any American official ever could, that the Iranian economy cannot survive a prolonged blockade. The rial is collapsing. Food prices are soaring. And every day the strait remains closed. More ordinary Iranians fall below the poverty line. On the other side, you have the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC Commander General Ahmad Vahidi and his deputies. These are not men who view this conflict as an economic crisis to be managed. These are men who view this conflict as an existential test of institutional identity. The IRGC was built to resist. Its entire purpose, its entire culture, its entire reason for existing is to never submit to American pressure. When the civilian negotiators came back from Islamabad with the outlines of what a deal might look like, the IRGC commanders reportedly looked at those outlines and said no. No enrichment cap without security guarantees, no acknowledgement of the nuclear program's limits, and absolutely no negotiations while an American blockade is strangling Iranian ports. According to sourced reporting, when the U.S. seized the Iranian cargo ship Tuska last week, IRGC commanders did not see it as an act of enforcement. They saw it as humiliation, and they accused Iran's civilian negotiators of being weak, of allowing this to happen by continuing to engage with an administration that was simultaneously seizing Iranian ships and blockading Iranian ports. That internal split is what Trump saw. And he made a calculation. He extended the ceasefire not out of goodwill and not out of weakness, but because going back to bombing a country whose government cannot produce a unified negotiating position would accomplish nothing strategically. You cannot bomb a deal into existence when the side you are bombing cannot agree internally on what terms they would accept. You kill people. You destroy infrastructure. You harden resolve, but you do not create a unified negotiating partner. You create more fractures. But here is the problem. An extension without an end date removes the pressure on Iran. The deadline was the leverage. The ticking clock was the one thing forcing the civilian faction in Tehran to push back against the IRGC hardliners and argue that a deal, any deal, was better than resumed bombardment. Remove the clock and the IRGC's argument becomes stronger. We told you America would blink. We told you patience was the strategy. We told you the blockade would hurt them as much as it hurts us. And now we have proof. Trump extended the ceasefire because he had no better option. And then, this morning, to prove exactly that point, a Revolutionary Guard gunboat opened fire on a container ship in the Strait without warning. No casualties. The ship did not sink. But that is not the point. That was not a military operation designed to destroy a target. That was a message. Directed not at Washington, but at the civilian faction inside Tehran. The IRGC was saying in the only language that matters to them that this ceasefire extension changes nothing. That the Strait is still theirs, that the blockade has not weakened them, and that the time for Iran's initiative has come. The phrase initiative is doing a lot of work there. In IRGC vocabulary, initiative does not mean diplomacy. It does not mean negotiation. It means escalation. It means asymmetric attacks. It means more gunboats, more mines, more pressure on the Strait until the civilian faction in Tehran stops trying to negotiate and starts supporting the military campaign fully. Now I want to zoom out from the daily drama of deadlines and gunboats and Truth Social posts, because there is a structural reality underneath all of this that most analysis is missing entirely. Trump said Iran's government is seriously fractured. And he is right. But here is the thing he did not say and probably does not want to say publicly. The fracture inside Iran's government is actually a strategic asset for Tehran in this negotiation, not a weakness. Let me explain exactly why, because this is the insight that changes how you see every headline from here on. When two parties sit across a negotiating table, the side that can credibly say my own hardliners will not accept this has enormous leverage. It is the classic good cop, bad cop dynamic, but operating at the level of a nation state. Iran's civilian negotiators can go to Islamabad, signal flexibility, show genuine interest in a deal, and then return to Tehran and say the IRGC will not allow us to accept these terms. They are not lying. They are accurately describing their political reality. And that reality forces the American side to offer better terms because the alternative is not just no deal. It is no deal and resumed war with an IRGC that is already preparing its initiative. The fracture is not a bug. It is a feature. It is how Iran has survived every major confrontation with the United States for the last 45 years. A unified Iran would have to say yes or no. A fractured Iran can always say maybe, and while you are waiting for an answer, the IRGC is moving oil through the shadow fleet and the civilian negotiators are running down the clock. Trump extending the ceasefire indefinitely is, when you strip away the truth social framing, an acknowledgement that the American pressure campaign has reached a ceiling. The threats to bomb every power plant and every bridge in Iran produced no unified Iranian surrender. The seizure of the Tuska produced no Iranian capitulation. The naval blockade, now approaching 2 weeks, has produced Iran shooting at more ships rather than backing down. The deadline that was supposed to force a decision has been quietly removed because the decision it was designed to force did not come. Nobody died on that ship this morning, but somebody will. Not if. When Let me give you the human cost numbers, because they matter and they are almost never mentioned in the same breath as the geopolitical analysis. Iran's forensics chief confirmed nearly 3,400 Iranians have been killed since February 28th. More than 2,200 people killed in Lebanon, 32 in Gulf states, 23 in Israel. Those are not statistics. Those are families. Those are funerals. Those are the human cost that sits underneath every diplomatic statement and every gunboat incident and every Truth Social post about unified proposals and fractured governments. Real people on both sides whose lives depend on whether two governments and one Revolutionary Guard Corps can find language that all three can live with. Pakistan has put significant political capital into this mediation. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif personally requested this extension from Trump. The Pakistani military, which has deep institutional relationships with both Washington and Tehran, has been working back channels for weeks. If the second round collapses without a deal, that capital evaporates, and Pakistan's ability to bring either side back to the table diminishes with it. That is not just a diplomatic loss. That is a loss of the only neutral ground that both sides still trust. Now let me show you the different Iranian voices from the last 24 hours, because they illustrate the fracture better than any analysis ever could. Iran's UN envoy said today he believes talks will happen if the United States ends its blockade. Iran's foreign minister called the blockade an act of war and a violation of the ceasefire. An IRGC-linked advisor called the extension a ploy to buy time for a surprise strike. A spokesperson for Iran's armed forces said the country is 100% ready for any surprise American attack, and an anonymous Iranian official told international media that the civilian leadership is frustrated with the IRGC's refusal to compromise. That is 5 different Iranian voices saying 5 different things in the same 24 hours. Seriously fractured is, if anything, an understatement. It is not a fracture. It is a canyon. Here is what you need to understand about the days ahead, because this is where the analysis gets important for your wallet, not just for your understanding of geopolitics. The removal of a hard deadline does one of 2 things. Either it creates space for the civilian faction in Tehran to build internal consensus around terms the IRGC can accept, which requires the IRGC to believe that the alternative to a deal is worse than the deal itself, or it removes the pressure that was keeping the civilian faction's voice dominant inside Iran's internal debate, allowing the IRGC to run out the clock while continuing to impose costs on American allies and American-aligned shipping in the Strait. The American blockade is the key variable. As long as it continues, the IRGC's argument that negotiations equal surrender has enormous force inside Iranian internal politics. The blockade is not just an economic instrument. It is an argument in Iran's internal debate. Every day it continues. It strengthens the position of the people in Tehran who believe the right response is military escalation, not diplomatic compromise. Trump knows this. His advisors know this. Lifting the blockade as a gesture of good faith would give the civilian faction in Tehran the ability to argue that engagement works. Look, they could say we negotiated and the blockade was lifted. That is proof that diplomacy is the path. But lifting the blockade means conceding the one piece of leverage that gives any deal its teeth. The blockade is both the obstacle to talks and the reason talks matter. Remove the obstacle and you remove the reason for Iran to make any concessions at all. That is the trap. And as of this morning, April 22nd, 2026, no one has found the exit. Here is what you need to watch in the next 48 hours. This is not speculation. This is pattern recognition from decades of watching how Iran negotiates. If Iran's civilian leadership announces a new round of talks within the next 2 days, that means the IRGC lost this round. It means the civilian faction successfully argued that engagement is the only way to get the blockade lifted. It means the gunboat attack was a final gesture of defiance from a losing internal faction, not the opening salvo of a new escalation. If Iran's gunboats fire on another ship within the next 48 hours, that means the IRGC is doubling down. It means the civilian faction is losing the internal argument. It means the initiative that Mahdi Mohammadi talked about has already begun. Watch the announcements from Tehran. Watch the water in the Strait. The signal will come from one of those two places, and it will come fast. The container ship that Iran's Revolutionary Guard shot at this morning did not sink. No one was hurt. The UKMTO confirmed the incident. Iran did not immediately acknowledge it. By the narrow measures of this conflict, it was a small event. But small events in contested waterways at the edge of collapsed deadlines have a way of becoming the sentence that future historians open their chapters with. Not the big speeches, not the press releases, not the ceasefire extensions. The gunboat that fired without warning. The deadline that came and went. The fracture that everyone saw but no one knew how to heal. I am Professor Morandi. Think carefully, question everything, and I will see you in the next one.